So some housekeeping rules. We ask, please, for respectful engagement in the chat box and with the views that are raised here during this session. If you could direct any questions for our speakers in the chat box below. And for further just taking this discussion outside of just this chat here, we're using hashtags #AEPF13 and #GreatAdaptations. So please use these hashtags on social media so we can continue this conversation and we can be a part of it. Joining us today will be the Glacier Trust and Eco Himal Nepal. Their tags are at the Glacier Trust and Eco Himal is at Himal443. So give them a follow. And I am your host today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ellen. I'm a marine scientist that specialised in the biological impacts of climate change on marine systems for the last 5 years. I'm currently Communications Officer for the charity Reboot the Future. And without further ado, I'll introduce you to the rest of our panelists today. So our first speaker will be Dr. Morgan Phillips. Now, Morgan is the UK co-director of the Glacier Trust, who enable climate change adaptation in Nepal. He is also head of Insight at Global Action Plan, who are a charity here in the UK who work with people to help achieve more sustainable lifestyles. Our next speaker, all the way from Nepal, is Narayan. Now, Narayan is a social development practitioner who's devoted over 2 decades to grassroots intervention for sustainable livelihood improvement in Nepal's mountain region. He is the initiator of several community-led agroforestry programs for ecological-based adaptation to climate change with Eco Himal, a non-for-profit organization. Also joining us from Eco Himal Nepal is Anisha. Now, Anisha is Deputy Project Manager at Eco Himal Nepal, and she currently leads on health and social development related projects. She works with deprived people to improve their social economic development, and Anisha holds a MA in sociology and a bachelor's in public health from 2 universities in Nepal. Thank you, Anisha. Now, closing the show, and our final speaker today will be Karis Richards. Karis is supporting the Glacier Trust on their We Need to Talk About Adaptation campaign, and she is currently finishing her Master's in Environment, Politics and Society at the University College London, where her research focuses on conceptualising the climate adaptation gap. Now, at the end of our session, there will be 20 minutes for you to direct your questions to the speakers. We'll have a Q&A session, and if you would like to stay with us, we would be very privileged if you would join us for our first screening of Coffee, Climate and Community, which is a Glacier Trust 2019 film that tells the adaptation story of coffee farming in Solokahumbu, which is one of Eco Himal's project sites. So first, to introduce a subject that really need no introduction. If you live here on planet Earth, I'm sure you're aware that climate change is already happening in our communities. The last 7 years have been some of the hottest on record, and this has come with a variety of challenges, including changes to precipitation and temperature regimes across the world. Now, this has stimulated increase in extreme weather events, including floods, droughts, fires, and storms, particularly in the mountain regions of places like Nepal and the Himalayas. We've had an increase in glacial lake outburst floods, where segments of glacier are falling away into the lakes below and bursting the fragile rock sills that keep them at bay. And these are causing huge torrents of water to course down onto communities and essentially sweep them away. Now, on top of climate disasters, you have shifting seasons. So changes in the timing of seasons, with spring getting earlier and fall getting later, and also changes in monsoon patterns and unpredictable rains. We're having really unprecedented effects on agricultural sector, particularly on small rural communities that rely heavily on farming. In addition to these threats, you have a global redistribution of species. So as climates start to warm up, pests and other diseases are able to reach higher elevations, and they're also shifting poleward to reach cooler climates. Now, this is having a devastating effect on native ecology. So these invasives are disrupting not only crop plants, but also spreading disease to communities that wouldn't have otherwise experienced them. Our first speaker today, and rather an expert on the matter, is Dr. Morgan Phillips. Now, Dr. Morgan Phillips has recently had his first child. So I'd like to start by saying congratulations, Morgan, and welcome to parenthood. Now, Morgan has recently been writing a book called Great Adaptations in the Shadow of a Climate Crisis. It is a book focused on adaptation and brings in stories of adaptation across the world, the good, the bad, and the really positive. So, Morgan, I'd like to start by asking you, what inspired you to write this book, Great Adaptations? And can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Thanks, Ellen. Hi, everyone. So yeah, as Ellen said, I'm the co-director of the Glacier Trust, and we enable climate change adaptation in Nepal exclusively. So it's within that context that I mostly understand adaptation, have kind of introduced to it myself. So I've set off in writing Great Adaptations, which is a short book coming out later this year, really because I was worried really that most people in the environmental movement who have kind of been my colleagues over the last 20 years since I started to be an environmentalist, they don't really come across adaptation stories very often. It's not something which comes across our radar that much. And so I fully admit myself that before I joined the Glacier Trust, adaptation wasn't something, when I thought about climate change, adaptation wasn't something which really was part of the conversations that I was having around the issue of what needed to be done about it. And it's only really since joining the Glacier Trust and visiting Nepal and seeing kind of the seen and unseen impacts that climate change is having that I really began to understand how urgent it is to enable adaptation, not just in Nepal, but in all over the world. And the more that we see the impacts that climate change is having, then the more apparent the need to adapt is becoming. And all of the complexities of the issues around adaptation were kind of hitting me as I was reading and learning more about it, of seeing kind of the problems with the way people were adapting, the kind of maladaptations that were happening, as well as the good adaptations and the great adaptations. And so really the kind of inspiration for the book was really to, and the kind of my motivation is really to introduce adaptation to my colleagues in the environmental sector, in a way which hopefully engages them. I've written lots of different case study stories up, which I've found in kind of hidden in the depths of the internet and on blogs and on PDFs and in hardback books, academic books and stuff, and actually drawn those out to try and make adaptation a more engaging topic, and try really to get people in the environmental movement to start to consider the implications of the growing amount of adaptation that is happening, because whether we kind of like it or not as an agenda, people are adapting to climate change and they're going to go on adapting to it. We've had 1.2 degrees of warming so far, and we're only going to see more warming in the coming decades. So, for all of us probably on this call, the planet is going to get warmer over before it gets cooler, if it ever gets cooler again. So the adaptation needs are going to go up with the temperature rises. And so really the main aim of the book is to engage people in adaptation as a topic, especially within the environmental movement, so they can become advocates for adaptation as an agenda, something that needs to happen, and become advocates for adaptations which are positive and just, and actually are complementary to other agendas that we have around mitigation, have around social justice, ecological justice. So the main aim really is to get people to talk about adaptation, which is why it's great to have this event today, which is all part of this. And Great Adaptations, I guess, is a book amidst a kind of wider campaign to try and get people talking about adaptation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Morgan. Now, you touched on it a little bit more, at climate change being a social justice issue, not just an ecological issue. Now, adaptation is still quite a small marginal part of our discussions around climate change. Why is it important, not just for us sitting here, but for other people, communities, that we talk more about adaptation and use our voice to talk more about adaptation generally?
Yeah, well, I think one thing to say, and it's hard to tell because we live in social media bubbles and it's difficult to know exactly what's going on in the world and what the general public or even the wider climate movement are hearing. But I've certainly noticed in the last 12 months or so that adaptation is starting to become a bit more talked about. Alok Sharma, the president of COP26, he tends to talk about it a bit more now compared to in the run-up to previous COP. events. So there is some discussion of it, but I think still within the kind of climate movement, the people that I follow and are kind of in touch with around climate change, there's still a reluctance to talk about adaptation. People are preferring still to talk about the mitigation side of it. They see a kind of conflict between the two and the two agendas, whereas we really need to start thinking about them as two sides of the same coin. But yeah, the reluctance to talk about adaptation, we could go into that at length because there's lots of different reasons why that is, but it's definitely still there. I mean, I've been talking to people about this book coming out and asking if they'll help support it. And well, adaptation is not really my topic, is the response I've got from a few people, which has been interesting. So I think the need is there, and I've kind of been thinking through in writing the book what the implications of not talking about adaptation are. And there's kind of four main ones, and I'll just kind of go through those briefly now. There's firstly, if the climate movement and climate justice advocates don't talk about adaptation, then it'll be harder to get it up the agenda of the world's kind of major decision makers and policy makers. So if they're not being forced to think about and fund adaptation or to create policy around adaptation, if they're not getting pressure from the climate justice movement to do that, then they're less likely to do it in a blunt terms. And so and what that means is that in parts of the world which are vastly under-resourced and marginalized, their voices and their calls for adaptation are going to go unheard. So if we're not talking about adaptation, the climate movement's not talking about it, then it's harder to amplify those voices who are asking for support to be enabled to be able to adapt to climate change. So that's the first problem if we don't talk about it. The other thing is that adaptations are happening. People will adapt. Human beings don't just sort of take things on the chin. We get confronted with a heat wave or a storm or an insect pest infestation or a flood, and we adapt. We do things. And the danger is if we're not sharing kind of best practice, if we're not bringing funding into adaptation as a cause, then the danger is that people will adapt in kind of ad hoc ways, in ways which are kind of maladaptive. So in adapting to climate change, they might say, reach for the air conditioner, burn a load of fossil fuels to be able to stay cool, which is just going to exacerbate climate change. And so it will have a negative impact like that. And so there's the danger that there'll be more and more adaptation, which is ad hoc and unplanned and kind of maladaptive. The third one is that if we're not talking about adaptation, those with the resources to adapt, because wealthy people in the world do have the resources, will adapt to climate change, are adapting to climate change. Air conditioning is, again, the best example of that people will just, if it gets hot, people crank up the air conditioners, and that causes more climate change. And if we're not talking about it and not kind of critiquing that or holding those people to account, and if they're not being scrutinized, then we'll have more of that kind of, there's a danger that there'll be more sort of self-interested adaptation, where people are just looking after themselves, adapting in ways which support their own, and not really thinking about the knock-on effects of it. So if we're not talking about adaptation, then we're not able to hold people to account for the ways that they are adapting. So that's the third one. And the fourth one is that there are people who maybe do have the resources to adapt, but they're not able to adapt in really positive and just ways because they're not being kind of exposed to training, to information, to inspirational stories, to the opportunities for economies of scale. So the great adaptations that are happening in the world, if we're not telling the stories about them, then those stories aren't going to spread, and people aren't going to be able to replicate each other's adaptation choices and methods, which will mean that we'll again have the danger that people will, by mistake, even if they're trying to be mindful and trying to hold social and environmental justice into account, they'll still kind of adapt in ways which cause sort of dangerous knock-on effects for other people. So we need to kind of talk about adaptation to be able to spread the stories of good practice and to inspire people to adapt in ways which are mindful and just, and to kind of be wary of the pitfalls of it, to be careful, to be more aware of the kind of knock-on effects of what they're doing.
Fantastic. Thank you, Morgan. And having read one of the earlier drafts of your book, I can attest that there are some very positive adaptation happening out in the world. There's also some pretty worrying adaptations already occurring. So I agree that we need to talk more about it so that we can have a just and transformative transition to our new climate era. Now, actually, I have got the cover of your book here, which I'd like to share with everybody because I think it's beautiful. Here we are. So this is Great Adaptations in the Shadow of a Climate Crisis. When can we expect to see this book on the shelves, Morgan?
So it's been published by Artbound, and yeah, thanks to you, Ellen, for when you read it and had back some really great comments, as does other people on this call, which is really helpful. It is due to come out in September, and will be in all good bookshops and some bad ones, no doubt. But we're in advance of that. In late June, we're going to kick off a crowdfunder so that people can buy the book early and get their copy before September, but also kind of support our effort to get this book into the hands of people in the environmental movement that we want to get it to. So part of the crowdfunder will be asking people to buy a copy for themselves, but also buy a copy for us to post on to those people in the environmental movement who are a bit reluctant to talk about adaptation, the sorts of ones we want to influence and to hopefully get them to speak about adaptation a bit more. And I should just point out there's one kind of final kind of important reason why we need to talk about adaptation more is because it is, as a fairly new topic, the narrative around it, the way it's being framed and understood in people's minds, is only just developing. And some people see it as an incremental process, which is just small changes gradually over the next decades as climate change gradually evolves, and other people see it as part of a transformative movement to change society. There's those two stories. There's the story of it being something which is done by large international bodies or multinational companies, or by nation states who will do it, adaptation to people and just go, right, we're going to build a massive flood defense out of concrete, and that's the adaptation that's happening. Or we can think about adaptation as more of a bottom-up process, which is citizen-led and part of this wider move to transform society. So the Glacier Trust certainly sees it as the latter. We see it very much as something to be enabled by citizens on the ground, and that's what we're trying to support in Nepal. But we need to talk about adaptation more, because that is how we can actually shape the story of what adaptation is. And as any PR person will tell you, the more that you tell a story of what it is, and the more likely it is that is what it will actually become. Stories are pretty powerful. So yeah, that's the last thing. And so I touch on these issues in the book, but really it's mostly a collection of quite hopefully interesting and sometimes a bit shocking, sometimes quite funny examples of adaptation that are happening around the world, just as ways so that people have got something to talk about when they want to talk about adaptation. So yeah, I will stop and get on to the next speaker. And yeah, thanks for your questions, Ellen, and for hosting.
That's okay, thank you. One of the main points, I think, in the take homes of your book is it says adaptation by the people for the people. And I think that is probably the bottom line of this fantastic collection of stories from adaptation around the world. Thank you. So our next speaker is Narayan Dakal. Narayan is Executive Director of Eco Himal Nepal, which is a charity on the ground in Nepal enabling real climate adaptation across, I think it's currently 7 sites that are up and running. He's truly inspirational, and I am happy to hand over to him now. Narayan, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Fantastic. Yes. Hi, Narayan. Can I ask, please, can you share with us the success of your community-led adaptation initiatives in Nepal?
Yes, thank you, Ellen. This is very nice for me to share our story, what we are doing in Nepal. And I'm trying to be grassroots level in the moment, not sharing the world scenario or what happened in the world. So I try to be more in Nepal and more concise in to our project area, what we are doing, Eco Himal and Glacier Trust and some other organization. So currently we have projects in 7 places, especially on climate change and adaptation. We have more projects, but these are the basically focus on climate change and adaptation. Especially the Deusa AFRC is Solukhumbu is our first project done together with Glacier Trust. It was started already in 2012. So we have done a lot, and this is became a replica. So we have replicated project in Mandan Devpur. It is in middle part of the country, Kabre Planchok. So this is also agroforest research center where we deal about the community-led adaptation. Similarly, we were able to replicate the project in environment conservation, also to empower the indigenous people in Sankhwa Sabha district. We call it in the environment conservation through indigenous community empowerment. This is in Sankhwa Sabha district. So this is also sort of remote village. It takes 6 days to reach there from Kathmandu. It's really far from Kathmandu district center, and we are doing there an agroforestry Khotang. This is recently replicated project, and agroforest in Sindhu Palchok. This is even quite recent, and also doing spice for health, because the adaptation links directly to the people's health and nature. So spice for health is another project which we deal with the spice and the nutrition. That is in Lamjung and Magdi, in Solukhumbu, also Solukhumbu. So another project is integrated rural development project in Solukhumbu, where we deal agriculture, wash, and renewable energy. These are our major projects in Kathmandu. Next slide, please. This is the Nepal's map, and the red arrow shows where we are working actually, and these are the places where we work. So if you see in the map, we are almost in the half of the country. So we are still trying to go further south and also further west. So we have designed a few projects in west. Most probably next year we will be in west also. Next slide. Okay, climate change and consequences. As Ellen already mentioned, what is the consequences in Nepal? It's a very serious, because we are less contributing in climate change, but more victim of the climate change. Nepal, especially the mountain countries. So you can see in the picture also the scenario, what exactly disaster happening. So it is the both human and nature effect. Not only the human or not only the nature. So we are suffering from the both effects, especially the glacier retreat and glacier lake outburst is, we are really in danger, because most of the water tower stays in Nepal and the mountain side in the so about 1.3 million people, 10.3 million people depend on the water tower of this Himalaya. So if there is a glacier floods and everything will be crashed, then forest fire, it is the major problem this year only in Kathmandu, due to the forest fire throughout the country. In Kathmandu, we are really in a difficult situation. Even it was the difficult to breathe. And similarly, we have a biodiversity loss. There is a due to forest fire, due to other reason, there is a huge loss of in biodiversity. And recently, we are suffering with the crop failure. So mostly we have a small holding farmers. So if there is a crop failure, one crop fails, then it is really difficult to survive them. So it is a major problem because of the climate change, and drought is frequent. So this is another major thing. So either huge rain or drought. And when in hailstorm is another major problem this year also. Both of these forest and forest fire and the windstorm destroyed a lot of crops in Nepal. And I think this is one of the major consequences for the food insecurity. Similarly, flash flood in the Tarai lowland area and landslide in the middle and high hill of the Nepal is frequent consequences. This is one of the picture in the side of landslide and forest fire and hailstorm. So erratic monsoon and unpredictable precipitation is happening quite frequent, and due to that we kiss farmers. Normally the small farmers never manage to do their regular routine work, routine farming things. It is destroying quite a lot, and the water resource are shrinking. So and water shortage is huge in Nepal. Maybe in the Nepal, in our rural village, the water will be next major issue for the adaptation. Next slide, please. How do we work? Normally, our working principle is very identical. So we are clearly aware of the community problem. So how vulnerable is the community and climate change in the climate change, so that we understand, that is our basic things, how we understand the community, how we work. And also we are very careful to introduce new technology and crop varieties, because in the different areas there is a different environment and different climate, and due to this climate change we have a kind of big suffering. So we are very concerned to provide the farmers to low tech technology instead of introducing new technology and failure. So we have trying to made a evidence based work, not in a workshop or a seminar in the five-star hotel. So, and gender friendly development activities, normally gender is the major issue, so we are trying to make as much as possible gender friendly adaptation activities. So now one effort is never enough, because we have a different circumstances. So we try to make an integrated approach, so that one thing fails, then other thing can compensate. So these are the strategy, and we are working on that principle. So that's why we are somehow sustaining our local communities. And especially we are going through the massive plantation to decarbonize, because we are not doing that harm. We do not have a big factories, we do not have a commercial farming or industrial farming. So we are the victim that other countries has done. So we are now trying to at least local adaptation from the decarbonization. So also we are trying to utilize as much as possible the local technologies, local resources, so we don't exploit the resources from outside. And socio-economic development is the main issue when we consider the adaptation. So people's health and also consumption, like we are trying to improve our consumption as much as possible. In green consumption, we are trying to organic farming or nature-based ecological farming. So that should be just for the future also. If we use something now, and then we have to consider our coming generation. So we are very conscious during our adaptation activities on that. So also we are very concerned about the sustainability. If we work now, and that should be last for the other generations. So we have to consider that the other generations should not suffer due to our misbehave or misadaptation. So also we are very much connected with the grassroots community. So we should know real pictures of the farmers, what we need to do for them and what must be done for that, and also the what should be effective in their sake. Because if we do something that might be effective for us, but that not much effective for them. So for an example, a simple step like community compost manure preparation can be done in a greater impact if we connect it with the local community. Next slide, please. Okay, these are some pictures what we are doing with the local community. So these are some meetings and nursery and adaptation measure we are taking with the local community. Next slide, please. Okay, what we are doing also, what effort we put in the adaptation. So it's a long, almost 2 decades we are working, and we are very grateful to the Glacier Trust that we started this agroforestry promotion from the support of Glacier Trust. This is actually we found the very suited for the small landholding farmers, and also in Nepal, I think the average land holding is 1.1 hectare. So it's very much of the farmers are small land holding, and the producer is also there, because they produce for themselves, this for the sustain, and then they have to also provide to others. So it is the one of the best suited model, the agroforestry, and we are trying to fold in a different way. So improve cooking stove for reduce firewood consumption, so we can reduce the load of fire and forest conserve. And also we are trying to improve the kitchen hygiene because the women and children are basically victim of the kitchen and the fire, this indoor air pollution. So we are promoting improved cooking stove. Similarly, we are not imposing our project. So first every project we try to piloting, testing, and kind of replicating. So once we replicate, if we found, and then upscaling the project. So that is the result. We started from one project from Deusa Agroforestry Resource Center with the support of Glacier Trust. Now we are implementing 7 projects in different part of the country. So also we are trying as much as a nature based organic promotion, so that people's health and the nature both we can save. So we call it cropping. Is not a simple cropping, it is for the coping. So we can, if we do the cropping, then we cope with the adaptation, we cope with the environment effect. So for that we are trying in threefold. One is fast growing crops, that is for nutrition compensation. Second is medium growing crop, that is for food sufficiency and sort of income. And long-term crop is we call is a pension crop. Once they invested, and then the other generation can benefit. So in this long term, we consider the tillage. Almost we are in a phase of digital tillage for this crop, and soil erosion, we can preserve the soil, and also we can have a continuous generation and huge decarbonization. So another fold of this is capacity building of the farmers, because normally rural farmer has no idea what is climate change. Still many farmers depend on the fate and fatalism, because they think it is because of our fate. If something happens, they consider it is because of our fate. So we are trying to change their mindset and aware them on climate change, its effect on human and nature both, and to build the resilience and bio-intensive production. As much as possible, we should go through the nature, and then processing also, because of processing it considered to the health and the market also. If we don't process right way, it doesn't go to market, and income should be limited by that. So we are very conscious on that. And water conservation and rational use of water is another issue in the mountain. So other is a health concern. We are not only trying to produce and make our people, also we are very much concerned on adaptation on the people's health, also. So that's why we are trying to force as much as possible the people's health, nutrition, green consumption, kitchen hygiene, and pulmonary disease. So also we are joint hand with the people. Not only do we trying to adopt or teach the people, also we are together with the people during the landslide, during the earthquake, during the pandemic like this pandemic, coronavirus 19, this COVID-19 pandemic. So these are our activities to integrate with the community, or to stay close with the community. And gender empowerment is the major issue, kind of freeing women for their time, productive engagement, and also empower, also to teach them about their rights and provide their rights, and respect of indigenous local knowledge and custom practice, because normally we can introduce all the new things here. So we have to respect the local tradition and local things, and innovation of suitable ideas. We are innovating different ideas and implementing those ideas in the community, so that are being more beneficial. Okay, next slide please. Okay, these are some project of coffee and the seedling production and the vegetable production. So it shows how we trying to adapt in the community, and what is the production pattern, what is the increasing plantation, and how much trying to adapt with the climate change. Okay, next slide please. Okay, this is also the commitment from our side, right? From last 2 decades, we are committing with the climate change responses. So we are not much aware in the beginning. So when we started a close connection with the local community, then we try to mitigate at least the cause of the climate change. So we consider this at least minimizing, reducing the greenhouse gas emission. In fact, in Nepal, we are not doing that sort of activities, but still we are very much aware in a small scale, like firing or burning things, this sort of thing, or managing animal shed or animal urine, this sort of thing we are trying to minimize as much as possible. Also, we are increasing carbon stock with the massive plantation and a different type of farming, and also slow, at least as much as possible, we are trying to slow the climate change effect by agroforest and other initiatives, tree cropping, other initiatives. So in the adaptation, as I explained already before, we have a climate change effect. This is the kind of more in-depth problem in Nepal, and we are trying to coping with the negative impact through the responsive adjustment. So as I explained, many adjustment what we are doing, and then again we are taking advantage of the positive result from the climate change. So our tree line is going up. So we are trying to adapt with the different crops, and also possibility of different crop. We are kind of demonstrating and trying and then implementing. These are our kind of effort to cope with the also a positive result. So everything has a two sides. So we are trying to cope with the black and white sides. Next slide, please. So these are some pictures what we are trying to stay with the community, and what is our effort. These are the cooking stove, and community are just in front of the cooking stove. These are the nursery settlement. We are training people right in the village, and this is the black pepper just in our village. So these are the just picture what we are doing. Next slide, please. Okay, then adaptation, continuing to the adaptation, we are trying through the flexible physical activities and structure we are creating. So as I mentioned before, asset base and also evidence base. So we have agroforestry centers. We are trying to fix agroforestry center. In the moment, we have about 7 agroforestry centers, and we are trying to establish as much possible greenhouse and off-season farming. And also we are trying to promote the alternative energy so that people can cope with the this adverse situation of the climate change. And rainwater harvest is being a common, because we are more water shortage, facing water shortage. And in mountain, you can see the river is flowing from down, and in the hill there is no water at all, and all the water source are shrinking. So we are trying to build the eco-friendly buildings. We are not using less cement, less external materials. So trying to make us also multi-layer plantation, so to utilize the land as much possible. And also the cash crop promotion is also more in our focus, because then people has a cash, and it will be more easy to adapt with the adverse situation. And so crops diversification. So we are more in diversification instead of monocropping, because monocrop can make a whole failure to the farmer. So we are, at least one crop can compensate if one fails. So that is our sort of strategy also. And diverse the income opportunity, as I mentioned before, fast, medium, and long lasting cultivation. So also we are trying to behavioral change and understanding, to develop the understanding of the community, like through capacity building, awareness raising, and know-how transfer. It is, we are trying to transfer even country to in one region to another region, the learnings. And also we are trying to community adaptation plan, we call kappa. So we are trying to make a kind of local adaptation plan, so people can understand and they can plan themselves. So they will build their resilience themselves. And another thing is consideration of food security and explore option. So we are trying to explore many options, like a cash crop, or like a long lasting crops you can restore. So these are spice. These are the measures we are trying to introduce in the community, and we are getting kind of engaged with the community. Okay, next slide, please. So these are some pictures again with the community. So trainings, and also plantation technique, biointensive plantation, and the kind of orientation to the local communities. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so principally we are very small scale. Both TGT and EcoHimal is a small, but our impact is quite high, and we do always test our project whether these are the good or not, whether it is useful or not to the community, and we pilot and then upscale and replicate. We never impose our project. Both organization is very much aware of this, and also we focus on demand and need of the community. Normally we work through the bottom up approach. We never go directly from upper place. So all of our project are need based. When people seek the project, and then we try to build up the project on that. And so we try to empower the local staff. Normally we don't bring the consultant from outside. We doesn't be a consultant from ourselves, from the Kathmandu or cities. So we try to empower the local people, local personalities, local lead farmers, and community based organization. Especially we set up the local organization, we empower them. The example of one example of Devsa Agro Forest Center is they are now implementing 7 projects from different 7 organizations. So that is the good example how we empower the local level organization and local community. So also we focus on women, empower women, because women are the main victim of the climate change, and young and marginalized people also we focus on that. Similarly, we focus on participatory planning, participatory project designing, and participation of the people. That is meaningful participation, and also that leads to ownership, and finally the sustainability. So in the moment, all of our project, TGT and Eco-Himal project, are won by the local community. So every projects are run by local community. We are just the catalyst. We put some input, and we try to empower them for to develop themselves. So it is their task, local communities' task, to do their own work. So also we try to be a low overhead cost and cost-effective strategies in Eco-Himal and TGT. We always divide the work, how much day we work for one project. So we are not trying to implement much projects. And okay, we go to the impact. Normally enable community to understand changing uncertain climate. That is the main thing. If we go our impact most is we are able to empower the local community to think about the uncertainty of the community and cope and make a plan and cope with that. So engage community and effectively in adaptation. That is our priority. And also we have a grasp the positive results. That's why we have a kind of impact that we are growing different vegetable in different altitude. That is one impact we have created. And we are able to increase the local farmers income through coffee, fruits, and cash crops, and also vegetables. So in example, 6,000 to 1.1 million rupees is increased in the community, in the different communities. So also we have very able to create the forage and fodder in the community that turn the village as a green village. So that ultimately reducing the forest loads, and implement climate resilient plan. So this is already made by the local community. So community are able to make this. And water issue, we are kind of rainwater harvest is widely adopted, and other measures of water consumption is kind of our achievement. And the micro climatic adaptation, like different plants, like cultivation of multi-purpose plant and marginal land, like a broom grass is one example of that plant. Also this is a kind of strategy, and we are quite success on that, and it is a good impact in the local community. And also we are minimizing the pest and disease impact, implementing different IPM methods, and also minimizing the land use, because layer crop is a very useful for the small holding people. So we are with the small land or small piece of land, we are trying to grow more and sustain them. Also non-seasonal vegetable, because normally greenhouse we are utilizing this different climatic. This is also microclimatic greenhouse. So we are trying to non-seasonal vegetable production for the nutrition and also the income. Also partnership with local government and non-governmental organization is a huge impact, because every year we are getting fund from the local government, and our local organization also getting a local fund from the local government. And normally local government is kind of replicating our project, and also included the plan in their annual plan. Okay, next slide please.
Thank you.
Okay, this is some pictures of the water conservation and the different crops and tree, and this is the photo from the mayors. They are kind of coming to our center and looking after and learning from that. Next slide please. Okay, this is the learnings we have done. I think I have explained many of the things. We have developed the assets, and we are trying to invent from different models, and also engage school students. We could call it Gurukul, and we are trying to influence the policy. So government policy and local policy, and also Also, we are trying to implement high value crops that is very beneficial. So reduce forest load is also beneficial. That is our good learning. If we self-sustain the local people, then forest load we can easily reduce. Then land use and fertile, and we separate the fertile and non-fertile land, and so layer cropping. These are quite good learnings. From that we can achieve more. And also massive plantation, that to green promotion. This is one good learning. And create gainful self-employment, because many local people who migrated people came back from the Middle East to the country for this due to our intervention. And also self-sufficient is we call it 4F. We are trying to empower people for food, forage and fodder, and fuel and finance, so they can income. They have an income from this. So this 4F is we are implementing. This is good learning for us. Soil erosion and less tillage is also necessary for the adaptation. And microclimate, as I mentioned before, and multi-use crops we have to promote. That is good learning. From that we can adapt better. And tangible, like we are creating the human and physical infrastructure that is necessary for the better adaptation. That is the good learning. We have to invest on that. And intangible, also more important for intangible assets like knowledge, income, and nutrition, food, and sufficiency and self-esteem. It is a very important self-esteem. If people do not have self-esteem, we lose the confidence. So it is a very good learning. And influence local government policy is also for funding to the local government and local people also. And the replicate of the project in various region is a more learning, and we are replicating in a wider sector. Okay, next slide, please.
Oh, sorry, Narayan. There you go.
Okay, this is the picture of firewood consumption. People used to collect in this way, so we are trying to reduce it. And we are more trying to focus on students. Students comes to our center and learn in the evening through the internet what happening in the world. And then in the morning they go to the field and they learn about the agriculture. And there is a coffee pulping machine, and this is a kind of we are using less energy efficient technology in the field. So these are the some initiative what we are doing through the picture. Next slide.
We now have Anisha.
Okay, thank you so much.
So much, Narayan, for your amazing work that you've been doing for over 2 decades. It really is inspirational. And thank you for just sharing with us all of your experience and knowledge that you've built up over that time. It's fantastic. Thank you so much. Now, next up, we have Narayan's colleague, Anisha Karal, who is one of the project managers at Eco Himal, Nepal. Now, Anisha, we touched on it briefly about empowering women's self-esteem and the cultural changes involved in climate change adaptation. Could you please expand on the growing role of women in these community-led adaptation initiatives? There we go. Can you hear me, Anisha? Have we got Anisha? Hey, there we go. Hello, Anisha.
Anisha?
You might have to take over here, Narayan, if she's if her internet's not working.
Yes, yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Just I'll go through this. She explains the scenario in Nepal. Normally, the women's role is increasing due to the climate change, and there is a boundary and transboundary youth migration. Normally, youths are from the village, and they come down to the small city, and then they go to the bigger city, and then they go to the other countries, especially the Middle East, the poor people. And that increased the trend of migration among male population, especially in male population that are the economically active population. And when they are not there, the agriculture is feminizing. So there, the women's role is increasing. And similarly, we have a patriarchal structure. So men-leaded structure. So men interact outside. Normally, they do not have the day-to-day regular job, and women have to involve in the household job every day. So we consider women's world never finish. So their responsibility, their economic tasks, and agricultural activities, everywhere they have to engage. So men finish at once, and then women have to do every day. So there also with the climate change effect and their role, it is quite difficult for them. And also they are resource poor. They have a limited access on resources, and also there is a large gap remains in the women's access on decision making, because normally men makes the decision and they have to implement it. So it's quite difficult, and it's also lack the leadership. Of course there is a provision from government side of the kind of reservation or something, but still they should be empowered. And there is a socio-cultural transformation, because the influence of other area is coming. They have a kind of amenities that have with them, but there is no empowerment. So we need to empower to cope with the socio-cultural transformation also. Next slide, please. Similarly, women's engagement in community-led adaptation is quite important, and they are more engaged. You can see the women, they are carrying the firewood, so firewood. Here socially role is divided for the women and men. So as I mentioned before, women never free. One role finished, then they have another task, they have another task. So male activities, normally there is a major activities. If they plow, and then all the crop farming should go to the women. If they irrigate, and then all the weeding and things goes to the women. So women activity is never ending. And without women, I think the major things could not be happen. So it is a major things because of the role division. And also the excess, due to excess, they are in more risks, because there is no access, but they have to involve here and there, and they are in more risks. So we have to think about the risk reduction and risk control information due to additional reproductive and domestic, because also women are more engaged in reproductive as throughout the world, and domestic work, and also care responsibility, because they have to take care of the women, husband, elderly people, and all these things. So it is quite difficult because of the social divided role in the adaptation. Also, they have the limited access on agro-technology. We are trying to give the low-tech agro-technology, but still it is not in the reach of the women. And that support, because if we have this sort of access, then that support better adaptation to the women. Women have limited access in grant also, or in tools, and also the kind of government initiatives. So we have to empower women, and in the adaptation, I think women should put in front line for the support. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, future role. We consider what women should do in the future, because we have to decrease the forest load, because if we empower women and if they are self-sustained in their field, then we can reduce the load of forest. Similarly, we understand the concept of agroforestry, then that should go through the women. If women understand the agroforestry, then at least they have many things in their field, and that will support them for the better adaptation. So this should be a future role to the women, that this will focus on the self-sufficiency. And also forest conservation can be possible by saving renewable energy like fuel consumption. So if we can assist women's role in the in this sector, then we can change their life a little bit. Also we can change their efficiency and make them a little bit easy in an easier situation. Similarly, rational use of water and natural resources, because they are the one who needs the water all the time, because other people can ask the water to them, because normally the custom is women have to provide everything. And also if there is no resources, they can't provide. So that is the rational use. Also we have to empower them for the rational use and for their future role, and understand the uncertainty of the climate change consequences, prepare accordingly the plan. Because if we cannot plan adaptive plan, then it is very difficult to them to cope with. So we have to try to intensify their role with the local plans and local adaptive measures. So that will be the better initiation from our side, and the better role of the women in future. Next slide, please. Okay, women should be increase their role in the community adaptation process. I think women self-empowerment, here we call it a self-empowerment. They should self-empowerment also. They should seek the opportunity, and they will do on their own a better job, and seek also access to resources, because women are normally reluctant to seek the resources, because they think this is the our job, not our job. The men can seek these resources. So I think this is the self-responsibility to seek the resources. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is some adaptive measures using the leaves and facilitating women on nutrition and income generating. So we are, as I mentioned before in my slide also, women should empower to the different cultivation system, fast growing, medium growing, and long-term growing. So then they can have access easily on nutrition, income, and also little bit relax for the future generation. Okay, next slide. Okay, then what we are doing is we are facilitating women and knowledge and responsive measure especially, and support on low technology nature-based production. So that needs less delays, less labor intensive, and less water. So these are the main thing we are doing with the women, and also facilitate for leadership. Once women has a leadership developed, they can seek many things on their own and control access and resources, because we are trying to kind of form a women group and micro credit small initiatives, and also try to give ownership more and land and the asset what we build during this adaptation and right over the land. That is the main thing. Also enhance adaptive capacity of the women. This is what we are doing in the moment. Next slide.
And that was the end of her slides. Actually, currently
Okay,
we have got a film for you all to see. It's just a short film, 5 minutes long, of Diusa, which I believe is one of Narayan and Anisha's project sites out in Nepal. So I'm just going to share that with you now. Here we go. Hopefully everybody can hear that.
कृषि वन भनेको के हो? मैले बुझेको कृषि वन चाहिँ जुन यो एउटा जुन पद्धति हो, यो चाहिँ यो जंगल, बोट बिरुवा, पशु र कृषि यी विषयहरूलाई संयोजन गरेर सँगसँगै सही तरिकाले एकले अर्कोलाई असर नपार्ने गरी संयुक्त रूपमा काम गरिने थलो अथवा काम गर्ने विषय नै कृषि वन। यो देउसामा चाहिँ यो कृषि वन स्रोत केन्द्र चाहियो र अर्को चाहिँ पशु वस्तु जुन परम्परागत प्रणाली छ त्यो चाहिँ ज्ञान प्रविधिको जुन सिप ज्ञान क्षमताको अभावले गर्दा चाहिँ यहाँ चाहिँ त्यो पनि अब नाश हुँदै गइरहेको अवस्था छ अथवा त्यो लोप हुने अवस्थामा पुगेको छ र अर्को चाहिँ कृषिमा जुन फलफुलहरू चाहिँ सुन्तला फल्ने ठाउँमा त्यो नाश भइरहेको छ हैन अब त्यसलाई जोगाउनको लागि त्यसलाई संरक्षण गर्नको लागि वातावरणलाई जोगाउनको लागि चाहिँ बिरुवाहरू उत्पादन गरेर वितरण गरिरहेको छ र वितरण गरिसकेपछि एउटा हाम्रो जलवायु परिवर्तनमा पनि राम्रो वातावरण बनेको छ जस्तै यहाँको विदेशी युवाहरू बेरोजगारबाट पनि जीव वञ्चित भएर रोजगार बन्नमा सफल भएका छन् एउटा चाहिँ यो दुवैजनाले छोटो छोटो हुन्छ होला अहिलेसम्म यो कृषि वन स्रोत केन्द्रको चाहिँ उपलब्धि जस्तै यहाँ चाहिँ हामीले यो प्लास्टिक पोखरीबाट विशेष सिँचाइ नभएको ठाउँमा चाहिँ सिँचाइ गरेर आधुनिकीकरण गरेर कृषि प्रणालीमा चाहिँ टेवा पुर्याएको छ र साथै यस्तो खालको बोटबिरुवाहरू अहिलेसम्म उत्पादन गर्ने संस्था पनि नभएको हुँदाखेरि यो चाहिँ एउटा नयाँ कामको सुरुवात भएको छ। यो 3 वर्षको अवधिमा जुन टेउसाका समुदायले र इच्छा चाहना अनुसार र इको हिमाल र ग्लेसियर ट्रस्टको सहयोगमा जुन यो संस्था स्थापना भयो र यहाँ चाहिँ समुदायहरू सङ्गठित भएर यो संस्थालाई माया गरेर यतिको सम्म जस्तो बिल्डिङ बनायो, यो होइन जग्गाहरू चाहिँ निःशुल्क प्राप्त गरेका छौँ र कार्यक्रममा अझै पनि चासो रहेको चाहिँ एकदमै राम्रो र उपलब्धि रहेको छ। अहिलेको जुन परिस्थितिमा यो विश्वव्यापी कुरा हो, जुन जलवायु परिवर्तनको प्रभावले गर्दा चाहिँ होइन अब विश्वमा हिम नदीहरू चाहिँ सुकिरहेछ, हिमाल पक्लिरहेछ, यहाँ अतिवृष्टि खरेटी विभिन्न यो प्रभावहरू देखिएको छ। त्यो हुनाले यसलाई एकदमै विस्तार गर्नुपर्छ। यहाँ मात्रै होइन, नेपालका कुनै कुनै अरू देशमा पनि विस्तार गर्नुपर्छ। यो कृषि वनस्पतिको उद्देश्य के हो भने यहाँनिर नै व्यावसायिक रूपमा यहाँको कृषकहरूलाई अगाडि बढाएर अर्ग्यानिक जस खाद्य पदार्थहरू उपलब्ध गराउने विशेष हाम्रो लक्ष्य र यो जलवायु परिवर्तनमा पनि विशेष गरी सकारात्मक तरिकाले बाटोले अगाडि बढाउने छ।
I hope you all enjoyed that film as much as I do and really got a sense of the work that's going on over in Nepal, thanks to Eco Himal and the Glacier Trust. Now, I believe we have Anisha back with us, who is one of the project managers at Eco Himal Nepal. And I would just like to ask her if she has anything she would like to add as a woman in one of those communities.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Ellen, for having me to say something about the woman's role in community-led adaptation. Sorry, I apologize because I lost the connection. Thanks to Narayan sir. The thing I would like to tell is like there has been impact of climate change over the women's livelihood, since women has multiple workload in their life, so that has multiple effect on their health, income, safety, and nutrition. So also in case of Nepal, there is a which doesn't let them to come out of the house. So that is just not letting the women to expose in the society, understand the impact of climate, know the value of mitigation measures and adaptation measures. So in the future roles, there can be an important role of women, like they can just flourish the or promote the crops by using agroforestry system and by increasing their knowledge in climate.
Oh, I think we might have lost her again. Okay, we're going to come back to Anisha later on in the question and answer session. So if anybody has any questions for her, please put them in the chat box below and hopefully she'll be back with us later to answer. I'll continue sharing our PowerPoint. So our final speaker today and closing the show is Karis Richards. Now, Karis has been a long-time supporter of the Glacier Trust's work. She's involved greatly in the We Need to Talk About Adaptation campaign that the Glacier Trust have been running in recent years. And I'd like to say, Karis, why do you think there is limited engagement on adaptation within the climate movement in the UK?
Hi, Ellen. So I think it's challenging to definitively say why there is limited engagement on adaptation in the UK. But some of my initial thoughts, I think in the UK, whilst we see the impacts of climate change, arguably, the impacts we see are not as frequently intense as they are in other countries. So I think there's an idea that adaptation maybe is not necessary so much here. I also think along similar lines, adaptation is often really associated with international development. Again, something not happening in the UK. but it overlooks a lot of the great adaptation work that is being done in the UK. I mean, particularly thinking about Glasgow, there's a lot of work going on up there. And the final thing I think is really fundamental. I think there's still this lingering idea that Morgan mentioned, that by talking about adaptation, we are somehow undermining or distracting from mitigation and the mitigation effort. We're admitting that climate change is already here, people are already adapting. And whilst mitigation is vital, and developing these negative emissions technologies is part of the solution, we shouldn't neglect adaptation and the people who are dealing with climate change right now. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we did for the We Need to Talk About Adaptation project, just to give some context. So we looked at 5 of the largest environmental organisations in the UK, so Friends of the Earth, WWF, Greenpeace, RSPB, and the Green Party of England and Wales. And so we reviewed over 2,500 articles that these organisations produced on their websites and blogs between March 2017 and December 2019. And what we found was that there were only 19 articles that they published that focused on adaptation. So 19 out of 2,534 articles. So whilst the coverage of climate change increased over those few years, the coverage of adaptation remained, very, very low. And so why was that the case? Well, whilst we can see the data, it's difficult to know exactly why there is limited engagement on adaptation in the UK. So we decided to look at how these organisations are framing adaptation when they talk about it. So if we can see how these organisations are talking about adaptation, then maybe we can understand why adaptation remains so peripheral. So what I realised is that it's all about framing. Narratives shape our understanding and impact how adaptation is treated in policy, and then subsequently practiced in the real world. So out of the 19 adaptation focused articles that we found, we identified 4 broad frames. Next slide, please. Thank you. So they are, called them the mitigation frame, the security frame, the techno-scientific frame, and the ecological frame. So the mitigation frame is the kind of the common frame that shows adaptation in opposition to mitigation, i.e. adaptation is important, but the focus must be on slashing emissions. We must be reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So contrary to the renewed call for equal standing to be given to adaptation and mitigation on the global climate agenda, adaptation is still the lesser equal to mitigation, and even potentially seen as a distraction from mitigation. The security frame is where adaptation is framed as this strategy to prevent catastrophic damage to the UK economy, for example, or as a way to prevent a mass migration because of climate change. It's much more removed from ideas of adaptation for society and for community. And this frame is definitely becoming more common because it makes adaptation much more politically relevant, because it talks in terms of security and economy. And it's worrying as it has the potential to ignore the social and the really important local aspects vital to make the process of adaptation just and sustainable. In the techno-scientific frame, so UK organisations, they had a really strong focus on flooding, as that's one of the main kind of climate changes we see here. And whilst in my research, I found little connection between adaptation and flood prevention that they spoke about, there was a recent paper by Rachel Harcourt and colleagues in 2020 where they looked at adaptation narratives in UK newspapers. And they found that there was a tendency to essentialize adaptation as this technological fix, as something that's connected to building a seawall to prevent coastal flooding or dredging a river. And then the ecological frame. So this was a frame that I didn't expect to see, but this narrative focused on ecosystems that are autonomously adapting to climate change. So there's the narrative of winners and losers of climate change, of some species who can adapt and some who can't. It shows that adaptation is not just a human concept. Humans, non-humans, we're all adapting. We all have to adapt, and we all share in the problems of climate change and in the triumphs of adaptation. So the report we produced was called Framing Adaptation. So it is really reassuring to see that there is more than one frame for adaptation. It's no longer only framed in opposition to mitigation, and it is beginning to kind of emerge from mitigation's shadow. However, we really need to challenge the security and techno-scientific framings of adaptation in particular. We need to be really conscious of them and how we contribute to framing them. So how do I think adaptation should be framed? I think it's really complicated. I think adaptation should be framed as a multi-dimensionally kind of a transformative is a process. It's a framing that shows just how urgent, but also how valuable adaptation is for many communities. We really need to see adaptation as a process that works with communities and is led by communities, rather than a top-down kind of project that is done to communities. It needs to really remain connected to people and livelihoods and well-being and self-esteem and ideas of justice. And most importantly, we all need to talk about adaptation. And in the UK, you know, we really need our largest environmental organisations to be part of that conversation. But beyond that, we all need to consciously frame adaptation because that's how we shape and how we drive what adaptation will look like. Adaptation is not just about coping with climate change. It's about, it offers this positive transformation for all of us in how we relate to our environments and how we relate to our communities. In the last 12 months, with the profile of adaptation being raised after the Climate Adaptation Summit in January of this year, and with COP26 on the horizon, the importance of adaptation needs to become more established globally, but also advocated for by the climate movement in the UK.
Thank you so much, Karis, for your very concise and well put together perspective of how the UK is currently, their attitudes towards adaptation. So thank you everybody and to all of our speakers for attending. We do now have a question and answer session, so I will stop sharing my screen. There we go. If you would like to pop any questions in the chat, or if you're feeling brave attendees, feel free to turn off or turn on your cameras and take yourself off mute and direct your questions at any of our panelists today. Let's have a little look.
Hi, Ellen. Sorry for, I cannot turn on my camera because of my low connectivity here in the Philippines. But I'm Erwin Puhawan from the PMCJ. I just want perhaps to ask our distinguished panelists on how the governments treat adaptation projects. Because here, you all know that we had the strongest typhoon that hit us, Typhoon Haiyan. And the response of the government in terms of adaptation is to build and construct projects that are not actually will adapt, but actually promote, you know, projects that are sometimes tainted with corruption. But how do governments, because this is very important, how do the state respond to adaptation project? Although we are very, very serious in pushing it, how about the state, UK, Nepal, and other countries? That'll be all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your questions, all the way from the Philippines. Fantastic. So I guess best posed to answer that question is probably either Dr. Morgan Phillips from the Glacier Trust or Narayan, as they're both heavily involved, I know, of writing grant applications and lobbying the government to act on their behalf and produce funding. So either Morgan or Narayan, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Owen, for your question. I didn't catch all of it, but it was to do with the way in which nation states should be promoting and enabling adaptation. I'm hearing. I think the really interesting thing about what's happening with the climate movement is so much of the focus is on mitigation, and quite rightly. There's a huge need to prevent climate change getting even worse than it already is, but we have to do it in line with also thinking about the adaptive side of it, and especially in countries where the impacts are getting really, really hard, as in the Philippines and in Nepal as well. I think for countries who are suffering the biggest impacts of it, they don't necessarily have the resources to enable all the adaptations that they need to enable. And that's where the kind of solidarity of the international community really comes into play. And I think what's been disappointing from our side in the UK, and actually quite embarrassing in recent times, is the reluctance of our government to support adaptation efforts around the world, or to support, you know, any projects, international development related projects. So we've had a cut in the foreign aid budget, which has made a lot of headlines here, and we actually suffered directly, Narayan and I, having spent a lot of time writing an application to enhance adaptation projects in Nepal and to expand the work that Narayan's doing, only to find out that the funding never existed in the first place. It's something that just recently happened, which was disappointing to see. So I think nation states obviously have a role to play in creating adaptation, especially at a national level and the large scale projects. But I think the key thing is to avoid any inequalities and injustices happening, is to ensure that the adaptations are really from the bottom up, and there's a kind of a process of deliberation and direct democracy at the local level, so that people are able to raise their voices and to talk about the adaptations that they want to see happening, and so that the adaptations are done in line with other agendas. So I think the most exciting thing that we hear from Narayan's presentation earlier and the slides that Anisha prepared as well, is shows how Eco-Hamal are really intersecting adaptation with other issues around gender equality and around local economic development. And so it's part of that transformative process and social justice process. And so I think the best thing that nation state governments can do is to do things like have citizens' assemblies at a local level to talk, to enable people to have their voices, to hear their voices, to make recommendations to central government of the sorts of adaptations they want to see happening in their own communities. And I think rather than enforcing top-down kind of one-size-fits-all ways of adapting, I think it's better if they can devolve the responsibility and decision-making and the budgeting around it as well, hopefully. But I think that all obviously depends on nation states having the resources available, which is a bigger issue about, you know, global inequalities. But I think I would always encourage the UK government and other kind of global north wealthier governments to, you know, they have a responsibility not just to prevent further climate change, but also to help people who are suffering from it to adapt to it and to cope with it. And I think that's a kind of responsibility that we have historically, that we need to actually undo the bad work that's happened as a result of kind of the way capitalism and so on is developed.
I agree. Thank you, Morgan. Hopefully, Owen, that answered some of your questions around funding, both international funding and going to own governments and municipalities. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions that they would like to pose to any of our speakers today? Feel free to type in the chat if you don't feel brave enough to go on and speak. Okay, I actually have a question for Anisha, if you can hear us, Anisha, and if your connection's strong enough. I would like to know how you're finding this, what's the pace of cultural change in your community, and how are they accepting these ideas of changing roles of women? So you're suggesting that women change their roles in the community, that men potentially change their roles in the community. Are these ideas accepted? Are they met with positive light, or are they met with hostility from some members of the community? Let's see if Anisha can hear me. She thinks she might have just dropped out. Gosh, shame. I think we've lost Narayan as well. Okay. Oh no, we have Narayan. Hello.
Hello. I'm here. I just couldn't hear you before.
That's okay. I was just asking, in your communities, in these project sites, across the 7 project sites that you have at the moment, are these changes that you're suggesting to male and female roles, are they welcomed, or are they met with hostility from some members of the community?
Thank you, Ellen. Normally, they are welcome because in the initial stage, it was a kind of conflict between male and female. And once, because it is not good that we go directly to the women and ignore the men. So what we are trying is we include men in the beginning. So we empower both. And we kind of try to make a clear role in between them. So it is quite welcomed. And mostly in many places, women are more forward in the moment.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Narayan, for sharing that. Well, that really concludes our session today. And I would just like to share and summarize a couple of the key points that we covered right from the introduction of Morgan's fantastic book, Great Adaptations, which will be coming out in September, and some of the thoughts and ideas that he posed there about adaptation, both here in the UK and globally. It's clear that we need to talk more about it and that it is already happening. If we stay out of the conversation and don't join this conversation on climate adaptation, then we're essentially letting somebody else dictate our communities and how we adapt. And we can't just sit back and enable other people and other powers, namely probably wealthier powers, to dictate how our communities are adapting. Adaptation should be by the people and for the people, as it says in Morgan's book. Hopefully you'll get to read it in September. And I strongly, strongly agree that. And I feel like that idea has been echoed throughout Narayan's presentation there and Anisha's, and summarized at the end there in Karis's, and ideas and attitudes towards adaptation, both here in the UK and globally. Adaptation shouldn't be against mitigation efforts. It should come hand in hand with it. So saying that we need to adapt is not saying that it's too late to reduce our carbon emissions and to put preventative measures in place, but we are saying that it is a process that's already happening. And we are glad that you've joined us today for this conversation. And hopefully this has provoked some thoughts to you about adaptation in your own communities and what's going on elsewhere in the world. So thank you very much. There are some links in the chat to the Great Adaptations book launch page on the Glacier Trust website. If you'd like to follow the Glacier Trust on social media, they're at the Glacier Trust. And same with EcoHimol is at Himol 244. And if you'd like to continue the conversation on social media, which we hope you do, please use hashtag Great Adaptations or hashtag AEPF13. So thank you again to all our speakers. Thank you, audience. If you'd like to stay with us, we do have another film. This one's 20 minutes long. It's a 2019 film by the Glacier Trust called Coffee, Climate, Community. It's a wonderful film and it expands a little bit more on the subjects that we've touched on here today. So I'm going to share that with you now. If you'd like to stay, you're welcome to. If not, I thank you very much for joining us today. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day and enjoy the other APF 13 events that are currently going on. Thank you. Let's get this up.
The two most important relationships we have are with each other and with the land. They require effort, ingenuity, and great care. Climate change is raging through these relationships with great force. It makes lives that are already precarious even harder. It combines with political and economic forces to pull communities apart. But it doesn't have to. Our connections to the land and each other run deep. The bonds are not easily broken. As the conditions around us morph and change, we adapt so that the bonds become stronger, not weaker. And as climate change changes everything, we don't cling hopelessly to a vanishing yesterday. We strive for a better tomorrow. In the remote community of Dosa, 40 miles south of Mount Everest, an organizing effort is underway. A group of farmers are changing the way they connect to the land and to the global economic structures that have held them in poverty for so long. What they are doing to simultaneously adapt to climate change and to eradicate poverty may provide a model that other Himalayan communities can follow. This is their story. It's 7 a.m. on a chilly January morning. A team from Eco Himal and the Glacier Trust are preparing the equipment they need to run a 3-day training workshop on Dosa's lower slopes. Below, farmers are busy picking ripe coffee beans from trees on land around their homes. These are Nepal's mid-hills. Dosa is a municipality of around 5,000 people. They live in traditional homes on ancient terrace slopes and, for generations, have existed as subsistence farmers trading oranges, rice, millet, and potatoes, or produce from chickens, goats, sheep, and cattle. Coffee grows well here, especially on the north-facing slopes at altitudes between 12 and 1,500 meters. The soils are not perfect, but they are fertile, and there are plenty of other larger trees that provide the shade that coffee trees need. Shade is great for people and animals too, especially as climate change increases temperatures and direct sunlight becomes too hot to bear. Growing coffee like this also absorbs more carbon dioxide and produces more oxygen than monoculture methods. But farmers here and across the region have not always been keen on coffee growing.
2014, when I was there for monitoring, not the tree crop, different thing in a regular project, and I found the farmers were cutting the trees, coffee trees. It was quite grown up. And then I stopped them. Why are cutting these trees? And they said, this is useless. We cannot sell the coffee, and processing is so difficult. And then I went down a little bit, and one woman was kind of pulping in a manual stone and 2 stones. She's using 2 stones like a grinding stone, and she was pulping. And I thought, oh my God, I understand what they are telling. And then in the other side, I found some coffee beans. They were drying. They were drying directly at sun. And then I stopped the farmer to cut the tree, and I asked him, okay, let me go to Kathmandu. Then I'll find some sort of a solution. Then we can, I'll tell you whether you should cut it or you will keep it.
Four years later, and things are very different. Over 300 farmers are now growing coffee in Dosa, and interest is growing in neighbouring communities. This is partly due to climate change. It now makes sense to grow coffee at 1,500 meters. It grows well, whereas other crops are beginning to struggle. But it is also the result of a sustained program of training and community organizing led by Eco Himal. Farmers have arrived for the workshop. They are inexperienced when it comes to growing coffee and are here to learn how to nurture trees from seedlings to full maturity, how to pick the beans, and how to prepare them for roasting. The workshop will be hands-on, but will also have classroom elements. This is not just about growing and processing coffee. The workshop will explore how to organize a community to market and sell coffee. The workshop will also explore how to organise as a community to market and sell coffee and the other high-value crops growing here, as part of a broader agroforestry program. The coffee is bringing fresh income into Dosa, helping to close the income gaps between rich and poor in Nepal.
My name is Bhola Kumar Swesta. I come from Gorkha district and working for Helvita Swiss Inter Cooperation Nepal as a coffee and organic agriculture advisor. In collaboration with Eco Himal Nepal, we are conducting organic coffee production and processing training for farmers of this area. And we had conducted last year also similar training for 3 days, and this year also doing the same. Yeah. Tea farmers, 30 plus farmers participating in this training from 6 or 7 villages. 7 Gaonpalika.
8,000 coffee tree saplings have been distributed across Dosa and neighbouring Waku in the last few years. 5,000 trees have already reached maturity. More are being distributed today. 15,000 saplings in total will be provided this year. Bamboo is used to construct frames to measure how far apart the trees should be planted, and smaller ones are made to support the sapling as it grows.
I'm talking about almost all parts of coffee from the history, where it came from, and its distribution in Nepal and in the worldwide, its market in the world market and in Nepal market, its potential for Nepal, and its challenges in production and processing, and also the market potential and income generating potential of the coffee.
Climate change has the potential to devastate this part of Nepal. Its impacts are already evident. The monsoon season is becoming less predictable. There are longer droughts, and there has been an influx of insect pests. The warmer temperatures at higher altitudes mean that trees and plants, but also weeds and parasites, are growing further up the hillside than was previously thought possible. It is deeply unsettling for everyone here, especially for those who are only just grasping the concepts of climate change. If they don't adapt, climate change will be life-ruining. Coffee production and agroforestry are part of that adaptation process. They improve the environment and the land. It keeps life here viable. There is an obvious benefit too. Increased wealth, even when it is modest, makes other things possible. The income generated can be invested in other climate change adaptation projects, like water harvesting, insect control, polytunnels, and landslide prevention.
म चाहिँ हरि कार्की र म इको हिमाल नेपालमा चाहिँ कृषि प्राविधिकको रूपमा काम गर्दै आइरहेको छु। अहिले चाहिँ अब विश्वमा खड्किरहेको जुन यो जलवायु परिवर्तनको मुद्दा छ, अब यो मुद्दा चाहिँ अब नेपाल पनि त्यतिकै त्यो मुद्दाप्रति चाहिँ अब संवेदनशील छ, जलवायु परिवर्तनलाई चाहिँ घटाउनु पर्छ भन्ने कुरा हो। र त्यसमा पनि हाम्रो चाहिँ अब अहिले यो दिगो रुख खेती कार्यक्रमले चाहिँ एकदमै जलवायु परिवर्तनलाई न्यूनीकरण गर्नका लागि एकदमै ठुलो सहयोग गरिरहेछ। किनभने हामीले अब अहिले चाहिँ यहाँ म्याक्सिमम कफी खेती गराइरहेछौँ र वायुमण्डलमा भएको म्याक्सिमम यो कार्बन सञ्चितीकरण गर्ने कुराहरूलाई चाहिँ हामीले रोपेको बिरुवा, हामीले रोपेको रुखले चाहिँ सहयोग गर्ने भएकोले यो कफी खेतीले चाहिँ एकदमै जलवायु परिवर्तनलाई चाहिँ न्यूनीकरण गर्न चाहिँ ठुलो सहयोग पुगेको छ। यो प्रत्यक्ष अप्रत्यक्ष सबै हिसाबले, किनभने अब
The farmers have come to this training to learn how to nurture their coffee trees from sapling to maturity. But they also want to know how to process the coffee bean once it has been picked. Coffee beans grow inside sweet, red coffee cherries. Once picked, these cherries need to be processed as soon as possible before the fruit begins to rot. The first step is to remove the peaty layer. It can be done by hand, one at a time, but it is very slow work. It is this part of the process that puts so many farmers off. One simple piece of equipment has made a huge difference in Dosa. a hand-turned coffee pulping machine. The Glacier Trust have provided 6 machines for farmers here. At the training, they learn how to use it.
घर चाहिँ नाम सुनिता राई, घर चाहिँ ठुलुङ दुधकोशी गाउँपालिका 4 जुगु। त्यो चाहिँ अहिले पानी पनि पर्दैन हैन, पहिला जति पनि हुन्थ्यो नि जस्तै हिउँ पर्ने ठाउँहरुमा हिउँ पर्न छोडिसक्यो, तुषारोहरु पर्ने ठाउँमा पनि अहिले तुषारो पर्न छोडिसक्यो र हाम्रोमा पहिला चाहिँ यो भन्दा 8-10 वर्ष अगाडि हामी बच्चै हुँदा चाहिँ जति चिसो फिल हुन्थ्यो नि अहिले त्यति चिसो चाहिँ छैन के, चिसो हुँदैन, जस्तो धेरै कुरा भइसक्यो।
It takes around 2 days for the coffee to dry after pulping. The beans are placed on homemade drying racks where they are regularly turned and remain shaded. They mustn't dry out fully. If the bean is dried in direct sunlight and becomes too parched, it will shrink and distort, affecting the quality. However, if the bean contains too much moisture, it will deteriorate in storage as bacteria and mold start to grow. Moisture can be judged by the color and hardness of the bean and the brittleness of the hull. The moisture content should be no lower than 9%, but no more than 12%. Up here, in the high hills, without specialist equipment, farmers must take great care and learn to rely on their own judgment to tell if their bean has the right moisture content. At trainings such as this, and a very long time before the coffee is poured into your cup, these farmers need to learn many crucial growing and processing details. But being able to consistently produce good quality beans every season, year after year, can transform a family's earning potential. This is why it is so important to invest heavily in training and to provide prolonged support for farmers who are growing delicate, high-value crops for the first time.
Coffee is potential for the mid-hills of Nepal. And this area is very much suitable for specialty coffee because this special area is at around 1200 meters and facing towards northeast. And the soil type is also good. And there are a number of fodder trees and forest trees which can be used as shade for coffee.
The reason this area has potential for coffee production is not just to do with the environmental conditions. The social conditions are developing too.
I am Anisha. I work at Himal as a district coordinator for the past 5 years in Solukhumbu. Traditional methods farmers used to farm the coffee in variety of ways, like improper use of fertilizers and then unbalanced irrigation method, on-dry harvesting method, and untimely pruning. In this way, they used to farm the coffee, but now this training has helped them to understand all stages of production involving from the soil selection, nursery preparation, picking, grading, roasting, and then also automatically to the marketing strategies.
Consistency is important not only to the individual farmer, but to the coffee growing community as a whole. The farmers sell their coffee beans to the local agroforestry resource centre, who then sell it on in bulk to roasters and traders in Kathmandu. The more consistency there is between the farmers, the better. So it makes sense to develop a common practice and to cooperate with each other as much as possible. Adaptation to climate change and poverty eradication can be done, has to be done, in tandem, and it requires some strategic thinking.
Then our first target is to produce the longer term income. Yeah. Because the young generation is going out of Kathmandu, from village to Kathmandu, village to out, ever. And only there, Either women or elderly people are there, senior citizens are there, and they are not able to work hard. And for the subsistence cereal crop, you have to plow the land and you have to put seeds, and it takes 6 months to grow one crop. Then after 6 months, they will eat for 3 months, enough for 3 months, then they have to start again. And also soil erosion and everything is kind of in cycle. So we thought, why don't we promote a long-term crop that they need less labor and more income.
Long-term planning is a concept farmers here understand. It is not just coffee that is being promoted. Hazelnut, macadamia, and moringa trees are all growing too. These are all long-term crops that need less labor and create more income. Also, to improve diets and bring in more money, farmers are being trained in growing cabbage, cauliflower, courgettes, tomatoes, and other seasonal crops. But right now, the focus is coffee. And in the workshop, Narayan is teaching farmers about the benefits of forming a cooperative, a jointly owned, democratically controlled enterprise model that will work for the collective interest of the community and create more returns directly back to the farmers.
In one side, we did a coffee training, and other side, that was a linkage with the cooperative that people can understand how to produce and what is the role of cooperative and how why they need a cooperative and what is the profit distribution system in the cooperative. Normally, there is a totally different system in company and cooperative. Cooperative is for the member, by the member, and to the member.
Collective action is the core resource of a cooperative and will create relationships that will help these farmers achieve gains that they wouldn't be able to individually. Ultimately, a transparent and well-managed cooperative will enable Dosa's farmers to become more resilient to economic and environmental shocks, another adaptation method against the rapidly changing climate. All around the world, in all the coffee-growing nations, there is a standard happy ending to this story. We hear how coffee farmers have organized themselves into a cooperative to grow, process, and sell their raw green coffee beans. These are the beans that are bought by the supermarkets, the coffee companies, and all the high street chains. It is roasted, packaged up, and sold to you with a fair trade stamp. Everyone is happy.
Or are they? The thing is, the vast majority of coffee is first bought as green, unroasted bean in its country of origin. It then gets transported across the oceans on enormous cargo ships from poor countries to rich countries. The problem is, it's only after this point that most of the profit is made. A green, unroasted bean is worth a lot less than a golden brown roasted bean. The farmer who labors tirelessly to grow it, pick it, process it, shoulder it uphill on foot to meet the trader gets paid way, way before any real money is made. This mug of coffee costs £2.75. The farmer who grew it got no more than 2 pence of that, probably less. Even the fair trade stuff.
This is why farmers are also learning how to roast coffee. They want this story to end differently, and it can. This is hand-roasted coffee, and a rare opportunity for these farmers to drink coffee grown on their own land. In the immediate future, coffee grown here will continue to be sold as unroasted green beans. But the cooperative that is forming in Dosa has bigger ambitions. They want to roast their own coffee at a commercial scale. In 2 years' time, they could be producing 1,000 kilograms a year, enough for 90,000 cups of coffee. It's not hard to imagine a few thousand cups of Dosa coffee being sold to trekkers on the trails up to Everest. So this story hasn't ended. The Dosa Coffee Cooperative may one day soon be selling roasted coffee locally, nationally, maybe even internationally. Once they are, they will be keeping a much larger share of the pot.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. I don't know if anybody was watching me during that, but I think I was beaming from ear to ear the whole time. It's not the first time I've watched it, and it probably won't be the last. So if you would like to share that video with friends, family, colleagues, please have a little look in the chat, and you'll see the link is there. Also, for any other links, signing up to the Glacier Trust e-newsletter is a fantastic way to stay on top of news, including the coffee growing and selling in Dosa. So please have a little look at the website and sign up if you're interested. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, panelists. You have been fantastic, particularly Narayan and Anisha, who have joined us from Nepal today. It's probably getting quite late there for you all. So I will let you all go, but thank you so much, and our biggest gratitude for being here today to talk about climate change adaptation with us. Thank you all. Stay safe. Bye now.